260 COVID-19 new cases confirmed as Abia governor tests positive. COVID-19 frontline workers threaten to down tools. In international news, protests spread globally in solidarity against racism, police brutality. And in sport, Man City's European ban appeal begins this week.
This is ANN News.
I am Olajumoke Olatunji. Nigeria has confirmed 260 new COVID-19 cases, and CDC posted on its official Twitter handle on Sunday. 18 states and the Federal Capital Territory all recorded new infections. Surprisingly, Abia leads the pack with 67 new cases. Lagos this time recorded 38 new infections. These new cases, Nigeria's COVID-19 total tally now stands at 12,486. Meanwhile, Abia State Governor Okeze Piazzo has gone into isolation after testing positive for virus. State Commissioner for Information John Okiyu Kalu said in a statement, Deputy Governor Ude Okochukwu will take charge in the state until Piazzo recovers. Abia State currently has 83 COVID-19 cases with 7 recoveries. Nigeria's Center for Disease Control has stopped the continuous use of Opinava and Ritonavir combination of drugs in COVID-19 patients. These combinations are an HIV antiviral medicine. Director General of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, Dr. Chikwe Ihekwazu, says the trials for chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine would still continue. Ihekwazu says, based on improved evidence and science, the antiviral drugs have not been helpful in the treatment of COVID-19 infections. The National Coordinator of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, Dr. Sani Aliyu, raised the alarm over the lack of access to care for chronic medical conditions, including human immunodeficiency virus, as well as the absence of maternal, newborn, and child health services. National Association of Resident Doctors has issued a notice of strike effective next Monday. The association is the umbrella body for all doctors working in government health facilities, including COVID-19 doctors. National President Dr. Aliyu Sokumba says the strike would go on regardless of the pandemic unless the federal government fulfills its promises of improved salary and working conditions. The Resident Doctors Association worries about the extreme critical conditions of its members, both in state and federal institutions. Nigeria Labour Congress (NLC) is asking the federal government to stop the continuous ban on interstate movements. The NLC says the ban is highly unnecessary. NLC President Ayuba Waba says since the federal government is planning to open up the aviation industry for local flights, nothing should stop interstate travels. Waba says the ban has crippled the means of livelihood for more than 2 million of its members under the road transport workers. The NLC boss says it is time to open up all sectors of the economy with specific sector protocols. Lagos Waste Management Authority (LOMA) has reacted to videos and pictures trending on social media about a huge mound of refuse deposited around Surulere after Saturday's rainfall. LOMA's acting managing director, Ibrahim Odumboni, says the agency has decided on a holistic approach to make the state environment cleaner and livable for all residents. Odumboni says various programs and drastic measures have been put in place to enhance operational efficiency by private sector participation, PSP operators, ensuring effective turnaround time at various dump sites. Loma boss further said the authority would collaborate with other state agencies to ensure to tackle the challenge of improper waste disposal. Odumboni also charged residents to stop indiscriminate waste disposal because of its negative environmental consequences. A People's Democratic Party executive in Ogun State has called on the Inspector General of Police to investigate a bribery allegation against the Federal High Court judge in the state. Embattled State Chairman Samson Bangboshe and Secretary Adele Keshitu says some unidentified persons are accusing them of bribing the federal judge to turn a case in their favor. Both parties have denied the allegations. State PDP chiefs say this is cheap blackmail, outright fabrication, and a lie.
Coming up, African stories. African countries join global protest against racism. And later, international news. Protests spread globally in solidarity against racism, police brutality.
You are watching ANN.
Remember that in the I want marry. She dey come my house today. I'm gonna tell her to marry me.
Remember what I taught you about playing music from the internet?
I'm gonna play romantic music for her. The phone remains small, make it done. Will you marry me? I have a surprise for you. Google, play me a romantic music. Everything is okay. Network is shaky. Google, play me a romantic music. Google, play me a romantic music.
Maybe I should go.
Don't let poor internet ruin special moments. Join the super fast and reliable 4G network and get double data.
Now in the watch.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. Ghana has lifted the ban on religious houses of worship and has authorized them to reopen. But despite the easing of the coronavirus restrictions on social gatherings, some churches have decided not to congregate for church services until further notice. Respondent Nabil Ahmed Rafai reports.
Members of the Christ Apostolic Church in Accra are taking safety precautions to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. This is the first Sunday service in the church after nearly 3 months when such religious gatherings were banned because of an outbreak of the coronavirus in Ghana.
We are looking up to God. He has power over everything. So we will be praying to him, and we are praying to him that if we have not gotten the vaccines or the medicine that can cure coronavirus, in his own wisdom, he grants us the wisdom and then give us medicine or solution to COVID-19.
On Friday, mosques were opened to Muslims for the congregational prayer, Juma. Worshippers had their temperatures taken and were all made to sanitize their hands and wear face masks before entering the mosque.
We assume that everybody who comes here doesn't know the rules. That's why we place our men from the entrance up to the door of the mosque. So the men are here to help, and anybody who proves difficult would ask our men to drive him and then say he should go home.
Although the government has now eased restrictions, only 100 people are allowed to worship at a time. However, there are still fears about the spread of the coronavirus, which is why this church had fewer than 100 people. While this church has opened for worshippers, there are many others that have decided to remain shut. Their leaders say it's still risky to allow people in because compliance with safety measures could prove difficult. So they are using social media platforms like Facebook to deliver sermons to their followers, but some prefer to go to the church or the mosque to worship.
I am very happy to join the service at church. I never thought the government would lift the ban, so we begin to hold congregational service again.
We thought that we would have to meet or congregate during the month of Ramadan. Unfortunately, we couldn't. So now that the mosques have been opened, I think it's a great opportunity for us to worship in congregation observing the social distancing and all the protocols that we're supposed to be.
While people can now hold congregational prayers, it could take some time for many to adjust to all the safety precautions, and this could lead to further spread of COVID-19. But the government has warned it will close down churches and mosques that fail to ensure strict compliance with the safety measures.
The sound of "We want justice and we want to breathe" echoed through the streets of Tunis, the Tunisian capital, as protesters marched against racism and police brutality. The protest that began in the U.S. has gained solidarity around the world. South Africa also staged its own protest marches in support of the cause. We begin with correspondent Adnan Chawoji in Tunis.
The campaign started online in Tunisia and other African nations. People have gathered near the municipal theatre in Tunis, calling for justice for George Floyd.
The video of the killing has shocked the world. Floyd was a black man. That's why he was killed.
The US calls for freedom and human rights and interferes in other countries, while its policemen kill their own citizens and disrespect international laws. The violence against peaceful protesters in the United States has aggravated the situation.
Students and human rights activists from sub-Saharan Africa have joined the protest movement, denouncing injustice in the United States.
The US pretends to be a democratic country, but unfortunately, racism and discrimination are the true face of the American society. It's sad that African Americans and other races are still facing injustice. This crime gives African nations the power to unite against these inhuman practices in the US.
A Tunisian journalist asserts that the ongoing crisis in the US has revealed a social crisis in the country.
The United States needs to improve its legislation and to train its security apparatuses on respecting the rights of citizens. Americans always raise human rights slogans abroad, while many vulnerable social classes are facing poverty, discrimination, and violence. The current U.S. administration has deepened the gap between the people and the state.
The U.S. Embassy in Tunis has released a communique saying the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis was a grave tragedy. The statement also said security forces around the world should be held accountable for their actions.
The death of a U.S. citizen, George Floyd, at the hands of the police has not only sparked widespread protests in the United States, but in other countries as well. Here in South Africa, it has even inspired the governing African National Congress and its alliance partners to launch an anti-racism campaign. All that in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. The campaign includes a call for all South Africans to wear black every Friday for at least 3 weeks to show solidarity in the fight against racism. Ordinary South African citizens and civil organizations have also declared their support to the Black Lives Matter movement. A large number of Not in My Name protesters gathered here at the United States Embassy in Pretoria in support of the protests currently ongoing in the US. The march also calls to an end to recurring racism here in South Africa and an end to police and security force brutality.
The significance of us coming to the embassy is to stand in solidarity with the international community and identify with the Black Lives Matter movement. Should we not receive justice for our people, we will proceed with intensifying our mass mobilization on the ground and make sure that we'll come back stronger.
South Africa's government also released a statement calling on all in America, especially security forces, to exercise maximum restraint in responding to the anger and frustration felt by many of its citizens.
When we return, international news. Protests spread globally in solidarity against racism, police brutality. And later, sports. Man City's European ban appeal begins this week.
You are watching ANN. Somewhere in the world, every second of the day, news is happening. And of course, Nigeria is bustling with news day and night. That is why ANN doesn't sleep. Our eyes are peeled, wide open, so no story escapes our radar. We stay abreast of world events and happenings at home. We keep you up to the minute in the world of sports. We give you information to stay on top of your investments and all the hard facts you'll need to navigate your day. If you miss us on air, you can keep up to date on our website and on our social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ANN Africa TV. We are ANN, Africa News Network. We do news right in a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. Protesters around the globe have continued to march against racism and police brutality continuously for nearly 2 weeks now. The protest began after George Floyd, an African-American man, died when a Minneapolis police officer kneeled on his neck for nearly 9 minutes. Now, some officers around the country have knelt to condemn racism in solidarity with protesters. Global anti-racism protests took place on Sunday. Rome, Berlin, London, and Paris saw hundreds of thousands of demonstrators on the streets. In a show of support for the Black Lives Matter movement, protesters in the English port of Bristol toppled a statue of Edward Colston, a 17th century slave trader. Social media images showed protesters kneeling on the statue's neck to recall the death of George Floyd that has sparked worldwide protest against racism and police violence. Brazil's political crisis is deepening as COVID-19 cases continue to surge. On Sunday, for the second time since the pandemic outbreak, anti- and pro-government demonstrators took to the streets in the country's biggest cities. Correspondent Lucrecio Franchi reports from Rio de Janeiro.
Chanting Vidas Negras Importam, Black Lives Matter, and carrying signs that read "White silence is violence," hundreds of Brazilians peacefully took to the streets in Rio de Janeiro to denounce racism and call for the president's removal. It was another protest against the government of a majority black or mixed-race country.
We are protesting in the streets following the rise of the global black movement that is showing us that our fight against the racism that is rooted in our society needs to take place at an international level.
Given orders to crush any disturbances, the protest was shadowed by heavily armed military police, themselves the object of protesters' anger. Here in Brazil, police violence is among the worst in the world. In 2019, in the state of Rio de Janeiro alone, 1,800 people died at the hands of the police, most of them in Rio's poor favelas. And the same military police was also at another pro-Bolsonaro protest, which had a very different agenda.
I came here because the anti-fascists have threatened to destroy the city and take the country to the brink of chaos, as in other countries. In my opinion, if we don't stop it now, it will only get worse.
Their activist, President Bolsonaro, has labeled terrorists and extremists.
We need radical change, which can happen by legal constitutional means, or it can be done with violence. I think it's better to do it peacefully.
But Brazil's political polarization has only spread during the coronavirus outbreak, strengthening the voices of those who oppose Bolsonaro, who, according to the latest polls, is now supported by only 33% of the population.
Mexican President Andrés Manuel Obrador has called for calm after an increase in COVID-19 deaths in the country. So far, more than 13,000 Mexicans have lost their lives to the pandemic. Still, the country has begun reopening its economy after 3 months of confinement. Correspondent Alex Dyer-Beverstock reports.
Following 3 months of a lockdown, Mexico is beginning to reopen.
It's instituting what it calls a traffic light policy, rating the country's 32 states individually on a red to green colour code basis and applying corresponding restrictions. David Palacios, a resident of the capital, says while the government wants a return to normal, he's more cautious.
We have to take care. If someone tells you the floor is slippery, how will you move? With caution. Otherwise you'll slip. Everyone says to stay at home. Sure, but how are you getting money?
And that loss of earnings has been a key issue for Mexico's ability to control the virus. Alberto Santos runs a restaurant in the centre, but desperate for income, he hasn't waited for the government's green light to reopen.
We reopened again last week. We didn't ask permission, we just opened. We had no food to eat, as we leave day to day.
The quarantine in Mexico has never truly been enforced, and as the country enters its next phase, all but one of its states are in the maximum risk category, with cases climbing rapidly by the day.
While the COVID-19 pandemic saw all non-essential commercial activity shut down, places like Mexico City's wholesale market have remained open throughout.
As a result, the market is now a high contagion zone, with police checkpoints and enter at your own risk signs. Inside, the only people dressed adequately for the risk are the citizens, participation government workers, who feel they're fighting a losing battle when it comes to offering advice.
The workers here should all at least be wearing face masks. But many of them get angry when we instruct them to wear them. We try our best, but if they refuse, there's nothing we can do.
As Mexico attempts to reopen society, many here say the post-lockdown protocols look much the same as they did during the depths of the crisis.
Up next, sport. Man City's European ban appeal begins this week. Please stay with us.
You are watching ANN.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. In sport, Manchester City has begun an appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport against their 2-year ban from European club competition. UEFA's club financial control body banned City and fined the club €30 million after allegedly breaching UEFA's financial fair play regulations between 2012 and 2016. City believe the financial control body has been compromised. The club also believe an independent judiciary will clear them. The appeal will be heard by 3 courts of arbitration lawyers. It will be held privately by video conference and will last for 3 days. A verdict is not expected until later this summer. Irish Ultimate Fighting Championship former featherweight and lightweight champion Conor McGregor has announced his retirement for the 3rd time in 4 years. The 31-year-old Irish made the statement on his official Twitter handle, where he also announced his retirement in 2016 and 2019. McGregor says he has become bored of UFC after watching recent behind closed doors fights. That is ANN News this evening. Thank you for joining us. For details on these and other breaking stories, visit our website, annafrica.news. Conversation continues on our social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ANN Africa TV. I am Olajumoke Olatunji. Have a pleasant evening.